Nelson's fire risk levels are the worst in 18 years, with conditions more severe than those that led to the devastating Port Hills fires in Christchurch. Nelson MP Nick Smith joined local fire chiefs in urging heightened public caution with fire risk levels in the region the worst since 2001 and hot, dry weather forecast for the next week. On a third straight day of temperatures in the late 20s and early 30s, Smith visited the Richmond Hills Fire Lookout on Tuesday with Principal Rural Fire Officer Ian Reid, Fire Emergency New Zealand Rural Regional Manager Richard McNamara and in Tasman Pine Forests Limited Chief Operating Officer Steve Chandler to see the effects of the dry weather on the region. The Big Dry is seen from Richmond Hill, looking northeast over Nelson City. Lookout attendant Mike Oliver has spent 20 years keeping an eye on the hills around Nelson from Golden Downs and Moterre. Oliver worked through the record drought in the summer of 2001, which came to be known as the Big Dry. Based on the fire risk information he had received, the summer was looking very similar, he said. Fire Emergency New Zealand Rural Regional Manager Richard McNamara says the Nelson conditions are worse than those which led to the devastating Port Hill fires in Christchurch. Areas of most concern were coastal forests like Rabbit Island, the eastern side of the Takaka Hill and Hira, where the fire service has classified the risk as very high or extreme. Smith said information regarding soil moisture levels had pointed to the Nelson region being just behind Marlborough as the driest in the country. The large amount of effort being put towards managing the fire risk was totally understandable when the value of Nelson's forests was $2 billion. The Waimea Valley, looking southwest from Richmond Hill, has also dried out, pushing up fire risks. No fire would ever put all of that at risk, but it is quite conceivable a major fire could take out $100 million worth of trees, he said. He was also nervous about the need for careful risk management of the Illuminate Summer Festival involving thousands of campers in the Canaan Downs starting on Wednesday for 8 days. Reid said a color code system was being allocated to the various forest areas around the region and came with a level of preparedness and prevention to be introduced across that site. FEN's Regional Manager Richard McNamara, Tasman Pine Forests Chief Operating Officer Steve Chandler, and Principal Rural Fire Officer Ian Reid talk about the escalating fire risks at the Richmond Hill Lookout. Much of the region currently sits around orange or red in the Nelson area. Weather stations around the region record rainfall, wind speed, soil temperature and humidity to assist in the decision-making. That information was then used to create a buildup index (BUI), which showed the amount of fuel available for combustion, indicating how the fire will develop after initial spread. McNamara said the current conditions put Nelson at a higher level than those which led to the devastating Christchurch bushfires of 2017. If you go over 80, that's extreme. We're getting readings of 102, it's beyond Port Hills, he said. While the lookout was not always the first to spot incidents, Reid said its 360-degree vantage point was a key part of coordination and intel in the event of a blaze. Takaka Hill was a good example the other week. We picked one up where a guy had been weed-eating, hit a rock and then went off to get a new spark plug for his chainsaw. The first he knew about a fire was when he met a crew on the Takaka Hill. Generally where there are people, that's where the fires will be, Reid said. Said while the fire risk was high and warranted a total fire ban, changes to the fence structure meant he was confident of having sufficient resources should the worst occur. The beauty of our organization with the integration is that all of a sudden, we've got a lot more friends. For instance, McNamara managed the area from the Waitaki River across to Hoston to the top of the South Island. Yeah, I'm on the phone to him and we're coordinating resources around the country that can come here. When we shut down mountain bike parks and things, it's not to be narcs or take people's fun away. If they're in there when a fire starts, we've got to get them out of there, and that becomes the priority that we've got to tip our resources into that while the fire burns, Reid said. Anything that's got little fine fuels that can dry out quickly and on a slope, for every 10 degrees a fire will go twice as fast as it would on the flat. So we've got all the ingredients, Reid said. Recent work on fire management strategy had enabled fans to identify which areas were likely to be of higher risk and plan accordingly. while Fens provided guidelines, gave the best practice advice, and held regular preparedness meetings with affected parties. Reid said landowners like Docker forest companies were free to use their own discretion if they felt the risk warranted it. Chandler said all harvesting crews were working between 4 a.m. and 1 p.m. and silviculture crews had reduced their workload and were now manning fire appliances to be on standby in case of an incident. We react pretty vigorously when it reaches red, so when it hits purple, we wouldn't want anyone in those forestry areas, Chandler said. Tips to avoid catastrophe. Fire Emergency New Zealand Rural Regional Manager Richard McNamara: it depends on the risk. If you're sitting in the middle of Nelson City in terms of vegetation, it's not too bad, but if you're on the outskirts, things like be careful around barbecues, even gas ones. We've had a number of fires started when they get knocked over by things like large pets. If you've got any section that sits next to a paddock or rural setting, don't mow your lawn in the heat of the day, wait until the evening. For people in the city, when you're going out into these areas, just remember you're moving into a different risk zone and you and your family are taking on that risk. Just be mindful of how you use your barbecue or even how you drive your vehicle. Driving through the grass, anything can crack a fire up. Don't leave your brain at home. Stuff.